The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Gracious and loving God, we give thanks for this day, for this chance to gather together and learn about ways in which we can serve people in our community and beyond. Open our hearts and our minds this morning as we learn about food insecurity. Inspire us to be your agents of love and healing in this world. All this we pray in God's holy name. Amen. Amen. All right, well, welcome everybody. We are blessed this morning to have with us the CEO of the Blue Ridge Area Food Bank, Michael McKee, who is going to talk with us this morning a bit about food insecurity issues in our community and the ways in which we can respond to that, the ways in which the Blue Ridge Area Food Bank is responding to it. And we're just delighted to have you with us, Michael, this morning. Let's start with a general question. What is the situation now with regard to food insecurity in our community? What are the needs? What are we dealing with?
Well, thank you for asking, Justin, and it's really fun for me to be here this morning and engage in this conversation. I think the headline answer to your question is that certainly for food banks, food banks started 5 decades ago, and essentially the situation in every community across the country, including our own, is that it's a bigger problem than ever, despite how much we do, how much we've grown. And I think the best way to explain why this might be is to really hear from the people that we're serving together with our community partners as they express some of the challenges. And so we have, as part of this slide presentation, which will be pretty short, just a few quotes from people telling a little about their experience and why they're coming to a food pantry. Now this couple, Carmen and Alfred, they're visiting a mobile food pantry down in Dillman in Buckingham County, and they're picking up for multiple families. They themselves experience a great deal of hardship, and yet, like so many of the guests we serve, they have this amazing capacity to help.
For 7 different families, and it's a must for these people to get food. Some of them are older and disabled, they can't get out, and need to go to food. So this is important. Autistic boys might be like if that child could be a vegetarian, he would. He doesn't like meat, so we always have to have a lot of fresh vegetables for the food just your arm.
What was a little difficult to hear there is not only are they picking up the 7 families, but their grandson sitting in the back seat there has autism. And like many children with autism, has very rigid rules about what he'll eat. And coming to the mobile food pantry, they're able to acquire a lot of fresh produce. More than half the food we put on a mobile food pantry is indeed fresh produce. We have about 14 mobile food pantry sites in several different counties across our service area. Just a word about what is it we're talking about when we talk about food insecurity. The USDA defines that for us. It's a lack of consistent access to food to support a healthy lifestyle. And this emphasis on health is really increasing. In fact, the USDA is really shifting to the use of the term nutrition security versus food security, because in this country, it really is about access to good nutrition to sustain proper health. And when you consider how many people struggle with food insecurity, 1 in 12 in our area alone, 1 in 9 nationwide, you can see that this is a very pervasive problem. We're talking about tens of millions of people across the country. And when we do research in our own area, we find that about half of the guests we serve together with our partners report that their health is only fair or worse, poor. So there's this really tight connection between health, really going back to diet-related diseases, cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, and access to nutritious food. To give you a sense of the scope of the problem, and when we talk about, we're serving about 110,000 people per month. That's a line of 26 miles if you stood people shoulder to shoulder. That's like from here, basically, over into Waynesboro. So it is a very significant problem of food insecurity, nutrition insecurity, going back ultimately to income and household financial insecurity. And of course, it's a public health problem when we consider so many people living in or near poverty who are also struggling with many health problems. Our mission is to provide nutritious food to our neighbors in need through community partnerships and passionate public support. Our vision is simple. We want everyone to have enough to eat. Whoops, wrong direction. We work through a network of pantries, often church and faith-based pantries, soup kitchens, shelters, as well as programs for seniors, children, and other specific populations who have particular difficulty accessing services on their own. And I would say, too, I keep going in the wrong direction, that in terms of impact, it's about the equivalent of 22 million meals each year to our neighbors. A common, I think that one of the most common profiles we'll see in our area is a single mom leading a household with 1 or 2 children. When we think about the 110,000 people, about a third or more of the people are children. And these households with children really have a more serious struggle with food insecurity. Children demand your time, and that's time that isn't available to work and earn money. And so it is, I think, common to find higher levels of severity of food insecurity in households with children. Now, this is Natil, and she has a very interesting story as a single mom who's trying to improve her life by going to school. She had a job in a school as an assistant in a classroom, was going to school herself to acquire skills that would enable her to improve her financial outlook. When the pandemic hit, as a classroom assistant, she lost her job like so many people did at that time.
Like I said, I have an associate's degree. I went to college for 2 years. I would love to get out there and get back in the school system, or even an office job. I have 2 girls and 2 boys, 15, 10, and 8, each 5. So it is harder trying to provide, but we have to stretch. We can't go to McDonald's like everybody else. We have to stretch. So this is good for me.
She's coming to a pantry. What's interesting about Natil, that's really true for a lot of the people we serve, is a struggle with transportation. She doesn't own a car. That really gets in the way for her to find employment in an area that doesn't really have much mass transportation. And in fact, the day our folks met Natil, she had to borrow a car to get to the food pantry because she had nothing in the house. And this is a common scenario with a single mom really struggling, no transportation, promise, but the promise is out of reach.
Like I said, I have an associate's degree. I went to college for 2 years.
There we go. I'm going to pass this one up. We'll get to that later. When we talk about sourcing for nutrition, that is a big emphasis. Often people are surprised to learn that more than 1/3 of the food we're distributing is indeed fresh produce. And we have created a software application together with faculty at JMU to actually source food on the basis of the nutrient density of the food. And about 96% of the food that we're distributing meets the yellow or green. You may be familiar with these stoplight kind of approaches to food selection. More than 3/4 are the green, meaning eat as often as you like, yellow, occasionally, red, very sparingly. So we're using science to really improve access to nutrition. As I mentioned, children are about 1/3 of the people we serve, and we have lots of different programs getting to them directly in schools or in places where they're gathering after school. We were really concerned about the plight of our seniors in our service area, fastest growing segment of the food insecure population overall, and their reliance on fixed incomes with soaring costs for housing, food, and healthcare is really creating a lot of vulnerability in a population that often is more isolated, less mobile, may lack access to transportation, and also is more susceptible to various diet-related diseases. I want to end on this slide to talk about for all the good that we and other food banks and our partners like food pantries, soup kitchens, and shelters are doing, there is not enough, and there are still people who are not accessing the services that they need. We did some research with a firm based in Richmond last year, and the research was designed to understanding who are our missing guests, who's not showing up, and what are the barriers in their way. And I thought, Justin, this could be really a springboard for some of the conversation that we have this morning. We're seeing a growing immigrant population here, Harrisonburg, Loudoun County, we go up that far, northern Shenandoah Valley. And often these are families either who may be undocumented or may be documented but have no idea how to access support. If they're not eligible for SNAP or other federal programs, that means they have to learn about and navigate a private charitable food assistance network, and that can be really daunting and may not know where to begin, and they still may be concerned because churches or nonprofit organizations still feel very official, and that can really scare them off. Those who don't have a strong command of English, whether it's Spanish speakers speaking Farsi or Russian, there are more than 100 languages spoken in immigrant communities up in the central Shenandoah Valley, a like number over in the Loudoun, Fauquier, Rappahannock County area. Certainly a lot of languages here, and if they don't have the ability to read material, navigate a website, it's very difficult for them. Newcomers, clearly those who are homebound have limited access to transportation, limited mobility. Young adults and teenagers, in particular, they're more susceptible to concerns around stigmatization. They're more susceptible to feelings of shame, in addition to not really learning yet how to access help. And those who really have what we would refer to as more emotional barriers, people who may feel shame, whatever their age, whatever their circumstances, but also people who may feel judged. And we find this to be especially true in communities of color, where they may go to a local church and they're confronted with either overt or most often covert bias about their circumstances, judgment about why they're there. They show up in a nice car, then there is a feeling, well, if you can afford that car, why are you here? Not thinking about necessarily, well, gosh, 3 months ago, you were doing just fine, and at 64% of Americans, which we have learned recently, you're living paycheck to paycheck. By month 3, you may be in line at a food pantry. So there is some judgment. I think Americans do have a bit of a tortured relationship with this idea of poverty and individual responsibility, and we want to help, but we struggle with what people are doing for themselves, and sometimes I think that leads, even among the best of us and the most well-intended of us, to some sort of judgment and bias when we don't necessarily know the people who are presenting to us. So those are the groups of neighbors we're thinking more about, and how we get around barriers like lack of transportation, language ability, and also the emotional barriers they have around shame and fear of judgment. And with that, I'll stop talking from slides.
All right. Thank you, Michael. That is very, very helpful. It raises a number of issues, and I was struck by the breadth and depth of your vision. Simple, but a deep and broad vision. Clearly, there are a lot of systemic issues at work in terms of food insecurity. So I could say, for instance, if we look at the population that comes to our food pantry here, it's really the same families, sometimes for multiple generations. They're not able to break out of the cycles of poverty because of transportation issues, housing issues, employment issues, and so forth. How does your organization, or how do organizations like yours, get at those deeper systemic issues, beyond just the Band-Aid approach, so to speak?
Great question. So in food banking, we talk about our work in terms of feeding the line versus shortening the line. And, we have become very good at acquiring food, 7 million pounds over the year, and redistributing that out into the community. So our model looks almost like a distribution business, because in a lot of ways we are. We have trucks and warehouses, and we're delivering and picking up. But at the end of the day, we also are working with groups like yours who are involved in the lives of the people that we're ultimately serving. And all of you become familiar with some of the different challenges they're facing. And so our dilemma is, what can we do beyond what we're doing now, beyond food distribution, our core competency, especially given that if the food bank decided to go in a different direction, it's not like there are other nonprofits here to do what we do. And so what we've learned through our own data collection is that about half the households are utilizing the pantries maybe once or twice a year. They're dipping in when the month is bad versus more regularly and month to month. But the trend is for people to use the services more frequently because more and more consider a food pantry a primary source of food. Why? Well, consider that single mom. If the single mom has a couple of kids and she's earning $20 an hour, we're thinking, okay, that's not so bad. That's roughly $40,000 a year. But then rent, maybe $1,500, $1,600, $1,700 a month. She has to consider a car payment, insurance on the car. She has to consider utilities. Maybe she has to spend $500 or $600 a month in her share of the health insurance premiums through the employer. And that, she might have only $300 or $400 a month left for food. Whether it's a single mom and kids, or a man who used to work in manufacturing and lost his job because technology has eliminated so many jobs and fell into the service sector and is able to only work a fraction of the hours. That's the scenario. And as technology continues to squeeze more living wage jobs out of the labor market for people who have low or perhaps very few skills, then we're going to see a large number of people who are going to be accessing our services more regularly. Certainly, traditionally, we've always served people who are in multi-generational poverty. And I would say, too, for these folks, if you think about the barriers they're facing every day, it's hard, really hard, to climb out of that when you are dealing with so many setbacks each month. You know, we get a heavy month in terms of our expenses or emergencies. We run a balance on a credit card. They can't. They might lose their car. They might lose their house. They might lose their utilities are turned off. And these aren't hypotheticals. These are regular occurrences for them. And so it's very difficult to get ahead, to better themselves, when they're constantly getting these hurdles in front of them that create setbacks, that trip them up, that land them on their face and the dirt. And so it's the hurdles they face in getting out of poverty are really huge. And I go back to the single mom. When you have children and daycare is, you know, $600, $700, $800 a month on the low end, then it's nearly impossible.
But it sounds, I mean, these issues are so enormous. It's more than your organization can tackle or any other organization. It seems like we need a multi-pronged approach anyway.
We do, and what we have thought about is what makes sense for our organization to go beyond food distribution. And we've really focused on nutrition and health. Poor health is one of the hurdles that keep people from improving their lives. And so if we can help them improve their health by access to more nutritious food, access to nutrition education, then we can make a measurable contribution to the improvement of their lives and their well-being and their ability to improve their own family circumstances. But that's just a piece of it. And so more of what we're doing now is networking, creating hunger coalitions or supporting hunger coalitions who are bringing different nonprofits together to look at how can we better serve our neighbors, fill in the gaps, address the issue of transportation, which in our area is enormous, and then also leverage advocacy where we can to improve household financial stability. And one of the I won't call it a low-hanging fruit because it's a lot of hard work, but SNAP, what we used to call food stamps. That is, despite some widespread public perception, an incredibly efficient and well-managed program. The error and fraud rate is under 6%, and error meaning error on the parts of departments of social services in addition to recipients, and fraud obviously in terms of the recipients. But under 6%, I don't think there's another federally run program that could boast a 6% fraud and error rate. And if we could get those EBT cards, like an ATM card, in the hands of more people who need them, that would make a huge difference to supporting not only their food needs, but their financial security in the household. Seniors in particular, only 1/3 of the seniors in Virginia who are eligible for SNAP actually access the benefit. And in part because it seems cumbersome, in part because they're ashamed, and in part because for people who are earning Social Security as their only income, their benefit may be as low as only $16 a month. So if we could get that minimum benefit for eligible seniors to $50 or $100 a month, and this is a population that is certainly, just to look at the economics, costing a lot more money in terms of Medicaid and Medicare expenses associated with treating chronic diseases, that would be a win, and it would be a win for working people as well.
We end up saving a lot of money in the end as a society. One concern that folks have about certain communities in our country is that they are functionally food deserts. That's the term used. So you can access food there, but it's not healthy food. It's that red food that you mentioned in your presentation. Do we have food deserts in the Blue Ridge area that are significant, and how can we help with that, encouraging?
Absolutely. Food deserts present in all kinds of ways, right? We don't necessarily think of the city being a food desert, but if you live in Friendship Court and you don't have a car, where are you going to shop for food? You know, you're going to go to that little market on Market Street where everything is 50% more than it would be at Kroger? Are you going to walk all the way over to Reed's, right? If you're in a rural area, oh my goodness, the problem is so much more pronounced. I was out in Bath County, and for most of those residents, the nearest grocery store of any kind is this old IGA that's about 30 minutes away. And the produce section was as big as 3 chairs in that row. That was it, right? And so that's one reason we do mobile food pantries, is to get produce out in especially these remote areas. We're also looking into the possibility, this is an idea, it's not even a plan or a test, as other food banks are doing, what if we became a SNAP provider, possibly empowering some of our partners to be SNAP providers, SNAP certified, so that we can take a truck in to a food desert, a community, and be able to sell the produce at a very deep discount, in addition to what we're doing, not in place of what we're doing with charitable food assistance. You know, food donations are decreasing. Manufacturers used to account for 30% of what we distribute. They're now at 10% because they're just way more efficient due to technology. Grocery stores are going to get that way, and the federal government provides us with commodities, but that's pretty volatile. So if we're going to get more food out, we've got to find ways of doing it that meet the needs of our neighbors, but can help us sustain what we're doing in time.
Are there ways to, I mean, let's assume that SNAP benefits were more widely available for people. That seems to be critical. But even if that were the case, are there ways to incentivize grocery stores to invest in these communities, to build grocery stores that actually have adequate produce lines, or does this just fall on you and your mobile truck?
Wouldn't it be nice? The reality is that the margins in retail grocery are really tiny, really tiny. I mean, they're under 2%. Okay. And so a brick and mortar grocery store, even a small one like Aldi or Lidl, is really hard to make work. And there have been public-private partnerships in Richmond, Philadelphia, elsewhere around the country that create sort of these non-profit or hybrid grocery stores and co-ops. And one after another, they fail because they cannot stay in business. They're running losses that are unsustainable, even for the nonprofits. And at the end of the day, we sustain losses through philanthropy, but that model doesn't work. Now, can we put the food on a truck and drive it in and serve close to the same number of people we might with a brick and mortar? Possibly. So that's one of the solutions we're exploring. That's great.
One of the issues you brought up was the stigma that people feel. And I'm wondering what advice you would have for us and for other institutions that have food pantries. How do we lessen that stigma or come across as more welcoming and hospitable to the people who are seeking food?
Thank you. I think among the things we can do is first really center ourselves when we're preparing for service and really think about letting go of any judgment or bias, even if we're not even aware of it. And just ask for that grace and greet people with that grace, and not in any way suggesting the pantry here or any specific way, okay? But we're human beings. Let's start there. Let's start in a moment, in a place of grace, and then really normalize the expression of generosity as we would if we were arriving at a friend's doorstep with a casserole and at a time of their need. And we approach our service as we would with our own friends. I think that's where we start. And we want to make sure people leave feeling good about having come. And so when we're in the business of distributing food, you know, there are a lot of moving parts, whether you're working in a pantry or a food bank. And so there's a little efficiency. We're trying to do this well and effectively and so on and so forth. And just working to where there's a balance where we're remembering that there is this human being with sadness and stories and hope and promise. And we're trying to help them feel good about this experience. And we want them to come back because in relationship, in conversation with us, we can provide a source of hope and help people feel, you know, a sense of warmth and maybe even a connection and belonging if they're feeling a little disconnected at the moment.
Thank you for that. I think it's a good time to open it up for questions that you might have for Michael. Are there any questions from the group? Yes.
Michael, how are you funded as a pantry funded?
How are you funded?
Yeah, so the food bank is funded primarily through private donations, and those are primarily from individuals. So our operating budget, what we use to pay for people and trucks and leases on some of our warehouses and all the rest of that sort of thing, is about $16 million a year. And of that, about 3/4 is coming from philanthropy. The other balance is coming through administrative funds the USDA gives us to distribute the food they give us, and some limited fee income, and then from the purchased food. We're buying about $4 million a year in purchased food for our partners to augment what we can provide otherwise. And they're reimbursing us about 75 cents on the dollar for that. So those things comprise the other quarter. But then about 77% of the philanthropic dollars are from individuals. You know, we don't live in a place where there are a lot of big corporations or big fancy foundations, and so we rely on individual contributions.
What other questions do you all have?
So,
sorry, Jeff.
What would your organization do with transformative?
Well, thank you for that.
What would you do with a transformative gift?
I think there are a number of things that we would do with a transformative gift. One is we would further the research and analytics we're doing to understand where we need to get more food in. Now that sounds really terribly uninspiring, but you know, our food banks developed by responding to food pantries. So the food didn't follow need, the food followed strength of our partners. That left gaps, but we don't really have a good way of understanding where those gaps are. So, you know, we're probably looking over the course of a few years, you know, spending 6 figures on really doing the research to find out where those gaps are, who the folks are, what the barriers are, and what we need to do to remove those barriers. Secondly, I think a transformative gift would really go into strengthening and diversifying our partner network. We work with 220 partners as food pantries, soup kitchens, and shelters, and then dozens more who help us with kids programs like backpacks and good food school markets and high school and the like. This is a network of volunteer-driven organizations. Churches, as many of you know, mainline Protestant churches in particular, are declining in membership. That means the volunteer force is shrinking. The people in their 60s, 70s, and even 80s who are running these pantries report largely they don't have successors ready to step up and take over for them. So we have invested in the last 3 or 4 years, well, really 6, about $4.1 million in strengthening our network, starting with the essentials like coolers and freezers to distribute more perishable food and more nutritious food. Refrigerator trucks and vans to do that. Computers to help them become more efficient and less reliant on volunteers. But now the investment needs to be around capacity and capability development to help them figure out leadership and succession models, to get them into networking with other partners, to find those who are really strongest and most highly motivated to take on a mobile pantry and drive into underserved communities, neighborhoods, or portions of the rural county to reach our neighbors in need. The food bank is in a position of coming up with the capital for all of those needs. A tiny little church pantry isn't going to raise easily $100,000 or $200,000 to buy a truck and get the food and operate a mobile pantry into a remote county. We can. And that's what we need to do. So the transformative gifts will support network development, including the diversification of our network, bringing different kinds of nonprofits who could sustain an ongoing mission to alleviating food insecurity. But they're going to need to be capitalized as well. And that's something we need to step into and do.
So that seems like that's really the next step, is moving from these established brick and mortar sites, getting the mobile trucks, purchasing all of that, and then going out to the areas that are not being served.
That's right. And the more we can do that in partnership and empower and fund a local community church, organization or church to do that work, because we cover 12,000 square miles. Like, we cannot have a staff person drive a truck into every community of need, but we can work closely with partners to take that on and do it well.
So that's very interesting. What are the questions you have? Yes?
I'm sure this is a naive question, but with so many of the guests being in rural areas, what's the relationship between hunger and the demise of family farming, small farms, people keeping their livestock, because presumably in rural areas there's more of an abundance of land, it's not your own, maybe it's a neighbor's land. And does the food bank do any work to I guess, to change the source of the food in a way?
Sure. So, did everyone hear the question? Or we kind of what role are we playing?
Short version of it.
Yeah. So basically, we are not trying to create a program or do something directly to promote community gardens, backyard gardens, or just in any way trying to do that directly. But what we are trying to do is invest in our partners who are doing those things. So our partners will come to us for a partner impact and innovation grant. We actually have a grant program that we operate to support what our partners are doing. And they might want the seed money to start a community garden or a backyard garden or something in a more rural area. And so what we're trying to do is fund those little programs or little efforts, and they are generally pretty small, to have the local partner and the local folks who have the relationships re-engage or introduce for the first time this idea of interacting with the land, growing food. The backyard garden can't meet all the food needs, but it can provide some important sources of good nutrition. And rather than try to focus on the behavior change, handing out seeds and instructions on how to plant a garden, we're really leveraging trusted people in their own communities to engage folks in doing that. It's not a big initiative, but we're trying to fund those among our partners where we can.
Sustain them as much as possible to support them. Right? Yes?
Well, it seems to me that underlying all of the food insecurity is the affordability of housing. And do you work at all with the Haven or other organizations that are trying to find ways for people to be more secure in their homes? It's such a complex issue.
I mean, yeah, there's a really close connection, very tight connection between food insecurity, housing insecurity, but all forms of financial insecurity. So many of our distribution sites, partner distribution sites, are at housing communities, public housing communities, senior housing communities. We have a program called a monthly food box program for seniors, about 2,500 to 3,000 a month. Many of those are in housing communities where they have very limited mobility, and so we work with partners who will go door to door and hand them a box every month, or get them to a pantry. So there is that connection, as there is to childcare, as there is to healthcare. I mean, the reality is food insecurity is really just an expression of household financial insecurity and instability. And there are a lot of reasons that exist that have as much to do with public policy and society. I will say that at the core of it, the shift in the 70s in business to prioritize rather shareholder return instead of stakeholder return, which really was the case through the 50s and 60s, really has led to the polarization of wealth and financial stability in the country. And I'm not just some left-winger saying this. The Business Roundtable, which is a big Wall Street organization, has come out and said that 2 years ago. So there's a lot to unwind and do differently, and we can tackle food insecurity, we can tackle housing, and we can tackle healthcare, and we can tackle all of these things one at a time. But the fundamental problem is people are not able to make ends meet, even when they are working. Yes?
Do you have any, do you get any feedback on the food that you actually do give to families, being the product of a single household? I was raised by a single father, not a mother, but I had three other brothers and a sister, and the big problem we had was my dad would buy potatoes and all these things, but we never had any time to cook them. Like, do you get feedback on, I don't want these potatoes because I have 3 kids and I take them to soccer and ballet and this and that and the other thing, and I don't have time to make this food, but what food do you have that I can, do you have an opportunity to customize plans in order to get nutrition out?
So before the pandemic, we had been working with our partners to adopt what we called a guest choice model, where the guests would come through and choose the foods that were right for their families rather than having volunteers pre-pack boxes and bags. That shifted a lot during the pandemic because our partners shifted to a no-touch, low-touch distribution model. But we're returning back to that. And our job is to keep a diversity of foods that are still nutritious in the inventory so that people in that set of circumstances have more options. That said, prepared food options are really expensive and available to us only through purchase. And so we do some of that, but probably not enough to meet the needs, especially for people who are homeless, for children who may not have an adult in the home all the time to prepare food, or for working moms or parents who are working 2 or more jobs and may not be available or may be too exhausted to cook. The most feedback we get is around the produce, how grateful people are for the produce, and then meat when we're able to provide widespread access to meat and high-quality proteins. And then there are some who have needs like that who would be, and people who are elderly who really struggle with staying on their feet in a kitchen and preparing a meal. So we are looking at how can we do more of that while maintaining the commitment to nutrition and the financial viability.
Michael, we're coming near the end of our time.
One
more, okay. Yeah.
I know during the pandemic, the school buses were used to distribute food, in part to continue to employ bus drivers, but is there any, because you talk about how do we reach the tens of thousands of miles, and school buses do drive down all these remote areas. Is there any discussion of utilizing the school bus, they're partnering with the schools to utilize all the
School buses to pick up kids and drop off food.
Right.
Yeah. You know, I think during the pandemic, there were some of those conversations that started, right? But no one could do anything with those conversations. We're all in the midst of dealing with the crisis. The school districts are really challenged right now in school transportation. And there are all these rules and regulations they have. We've had challenges getting the transportation departments and school divisions to accept kids bringing a bag of food as part of our backpack program onto the bus, because they don't like the kids getting into that food, and then, it's an inconvenience. I'll leave it at that. So I think there's promise with that idea, but there's a lot to overcome in terms of addressing how to operationalize it. And I think if we can pilot something within a school district, especially a rural one, and make it work, we could get some legs under that idea.
Well, let's give Michael a round of applause for his presentation.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I love the ability to do this and take it and go forth and find an opportunity with 2 or 3 friends this week to kind of talk about the issue and share whatever seemed meaningful to you. Please.
Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be God.